So is there anyone else to come or? Okay, so we'll look at some combinatorial problems, some examples, and we'll try to solve them using some linear algebra. So that's what we'll do in this 1.5 hours here. So are people here familiar with some basic linear algebra? So anyway, I'll just say whatever is required in the proofs of what the theorem that I state. So I'll just, so the idea here is, so we'll be looking at what are called extremal problems in combinatorics. In the examples that we'll see, we look at extremal problems. So what that means is, suppose you're given this set, say 1 to n, and you want to find a collection of subsets of this set which satisfies some properties, and you want to find how many sets, what is the maximum or maximum number of sets I can collect from this set of 1 to n which will satisfy that property. So you have seen a similar sort of thing in your tutorial, the 5th tutorial, the first problem. Basically you're asked find a collection of subsets of this. What is the maximum number of sets that you can subsets you can take from this set such that no two are disjoint? So what is the answer? I mean, have people solved? So yeah. So why is that bound coming? Why is it at most 2 power n minus 1? What happens if you pick anything more? The complement will be picked. So these are the sort of problems which are, so they form a area in combinatorics called extremal combinatorics, where basically you're asking for such questions. What is the maximum number of sets you can pick which will satisfy a certain property? What is the minimum number you can pick? And we'll be trying to solve some problems of this form using some linear algebra. Okay. So we'll start with a small example. So yeah. So here is an example. So this is called the odd town problem. So again, you are looking at, the problem is this: find a collection of subsets of 1 to n such that, so for collection I'll call it, say, some S, such that if you pick the cardinal for any A in S, if you take any set, the cardinality of the set is odd, and for any A and B in S, the cardinality of A intersection B is odd. So you want to find a collection of subsets of n with these two properties. That is, the cardinality of each set is odd and the cardinality of the intersection is also odd for any pair. So what is the maximum number of such sets you can pick which will satisfy these two properties? I mean, what is the guess that you have? How much can you pick? So how is the n coming? Well, anyway, just check. The answer is, yeah, of course it is n. So we'll try to prove that. So we'll try to prove that the maximum that you can attain here is n. You can't do more than that. So the idea is to use some linear algebra. So the linear algebra to solve this problem. So the basic idea in this technique, the linear algebraic method, is to associate a vector space corresponding to, so you want to find a collection of sets which is going to satisfy this property. So somehow we want to associate this collection of sets to a set of vectors in a suitable vector space, and then argue that these vectors are actually going to be linearly independent. So are the terms clear? What is a vector space? What is linear independence? Is it clear to everyone? Okay. So that is the idea here. You want to associate a set of vectors here to these corresponding to these sets in a suitable vector space and try to argue that these vectors are actually linearly independent. So that will mean that if all the vectors corresponding to these sets are linearly independent, then you can have at most the dimension many of them. You can't have more than that. So suppose you are able to select a small dimensional vector space and associate vectors of that vector space to this set S, such that these vectors are actually linearly independent, then you actually say that the maximum collection you can have is the dimension of the vector space. So that is going to be the idea here. Almost everything is going to be similar. I mean, this is the basic idea that you're going to use throughout. So what is one way of associating vectors to sets? I mean, what is the way that comes? What is the most natural way you can think of? N-bit vectors, and you put a 1 if the element is there. So that is the most natural. So those are known as incidence vectors corresponding to sets. So that's what we do. So suppose S has these sets, S1 to Sn. And corresponding to S1, I have this vector V1 and so on till Vm. So these are vectors corresponding to a set. I put 1 if that particular element is there in the set. I put 1 at that position if that element is there in the set S1. That's all. So look at, and I want to show that this is actually going to be linearly independent. So look at this inner product of, take any two vectors and look at this. Do you know what this means? This is basically, this is nothing but Vi transpose Vi, Vj. This is like the inner product. Right? Yeah. So what is the, so given two vectors Vi and Vj, what is this inner product going to be? Yeah, but what is, in this setting, what is it? See, what are my sets? The collection of sets satisfy these two properties. So what is exactly this inner product? That? What is this value here? It's the size of intersection. This is just cardinality of Si intersection Sj. Right? So now I will work with mod 2. I will work with this F2. Do you know what this means? Finite field of order 2. I mean, have you seen this before? Or? Okay. So if you're working here, what is this value, this Vi, Vj? This is 1 if this thing is odd and it's 0 otherwise. Right? So what do I want to prove? I want to show that these are linearly independent. So what does that mean? There exists, if summation lambda I Vi is equal to 0, then for all I, lambda I is equal to 0. This is what you mean by linear independence, isn't it? So I want to show this. Right? Okay. I want to show that these vectors are actually going to be linearly independent. That's what I want, isn't it? Yeah. Oh wait, did I make a mistake somewhere in the problem? Oh sorry, I made a mistake somewhere. This is even. That's it. So I want this. It's not actually odd, I want even. Okay. I made a mistake, I'm sorry. So in this case, so this is what we want. So if you look at any two different Vi and Vj, then their inner product is going to be 0, isn't it? Because these Vi's are coming from this collection here, and I know that their intersection is even. Therefore, Vi even Vj is nothing but the cardinality of this intersection, which is even. Therefore, this inner product is 0, right? And suppose, and I want to prove that this is actually going to give me a linearly independent collection of vectors. So suppose not, it's proved by contradiction. Suppose not, and you have such a collection where all the lambda i's are not 0. Then what you do is take lambda I Vi, the summation, and take an inner product with some vector, say the first one V1. Okay, look at this inner product. This is nothing but summation lambda I V1 V1 lambda 1 plus lambda 2 V2 V1 lambda m inner product Vm V1, right? This is this inner product. But you know that these are vectors corresponding to these sets, and the sets intersection is even. Therefore, all these values are actually 0, these inner products. Therefore, this has to be 0, lambda 1 has to be 0. And this is 1 because the cardinality of set is even, odd. So this value has to be 1. Therefore, this lambda 1 has to be 0. Correspondingly, you can prove that each of these lambda 2 to lambda m are 0. So basically, you are able to prove that these vectors that I chose are actually linearly independent. Therefore, m can be at most n, because I am looking at, which is basically f2 to the n, right? You have n bit vectors where the elements of the vectors are from the field f2. So this is the flavor of this method. You want to solve some sort of an extremal problem. You associate the objects that you have with some vectors and then try to prove that they are actually linearly independent and suitable low dimensional vector space. So is the idea clear? I mean, this proof also, it's not, is it clear to everyone?
But I mean, if you prove that dimension is at most n, then like how do you prove that there are n number of vectors?
No, I want to say what is the maximum that you can do. I can always find n vectors, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know I can find n vectors, which is basically each of the singletons, right? Now I want to show that you can't do better than this, right? So how I am going to prove is, suppose I take a collection which has m many of them. The collection, I don't know what m is, I want to bound m. I take m many of them and I associate these vectors to it. And then I am showing that these vectors are actually going to be linearly independent in an n-dimensional vector space. So you can actually have only n many of them, you can't have more than that. And I can actually show you the n many of them. So that is the idea of the proof here.
Any more than n vectors we take will have to be.
Yeah, n-dimensional, you can't have more than n linearly independent vectors in a n-dimensional vector space. So is these ideas clear? I mean, are you hearing it for the first time, or? I hope not. Okay. So I don't know whether this was covered in that polynomial method in combinatorics, some ideas. I mean, some basic fields or something I guess was covered. Okay. So similarly, you can ask a question in which you put this also as even. I won't discuss it now, I don't know whether I'll get time. So that is also an interesting problem. So I don't know whether I'll discuss it now. I'll go to another question here. So this is associated with, it's going to be an extremal problem. Basically, I want to find a collection of subset which is going to satisfy a certain property. And I want to know what is the maximum collection of sets I can pick. So this is known as Fisher's inequality. So again, I have this set. You have any doubts? So again, you have this. You are looking at subsets of 1 to n, and say a1 to ak, such that ai intersection aj. Am is equal to k for all I and j. So you want to find a collection such that the intersection is all same. All the intersection is equal to the same constant k. Now you want to know what is the maximum number of such AIs that you can pick. So it is very similar to this problem, but I mean you don't have this restriction, but basically you're asking for. So what do you think is a possible answer for this? Suppose I give k equal to 1. N minus 1. And you can actually find, but no. Actually, the answer is that this m is at most n, no matter what that k is. You can't pick more than n subsets of 1 to n, such that any two will have the same intersection. So for 1, you can actually n minus 1 you can achieve. I don't know how to achieve n. So this is the bound that we have. Yeah, I guess you can get n also. Yeah, 2 sets, 1, 2, 2, 3, and then 1. Yeah. So n for 1 you have. So this is saying much more. It's saying that for any k it is true. And anyway, in the other case, you actually have a lower bound. You have shown that there is one. You have shown that there is a collection of subsets such that this condition is satisfied, and there are n many of them. But you want to show that you can't do much better. I mean, this is the best. This simple trivial thing that you picked is the best that you can do. You can't do much more than this. So that is what we want to prove.
1, 2, 2, 3. So 3, 4 and 1, 2 intersection will be null, no?
Huh?
3, 4.
Yeah.
Take it with 3, 4 and 1, 2. Intersection will be null set. But we want it to be equal to 1.
Oh yeah, that is not. It's not correct. Yeah. Oh yeah, that is true. Look at n minus 1 subsets. I mean, that is for n minus 2 or something, but yeah, for 1, yeah, 1 you can do always. 1 you can do the following. Oh no, I'm not sure. So I'm not sure.
So take 1, then 1, 2, 1, 3, 1,
Yeah. Yeah. So n you can get. So I'm saying that for any k, this is actually going to be true. So the idea is again going to be exactly like this. You want to associate some vectors to these sets a1 to am, and you want to show that they are actually going to be linearly independent. So what is the vectors that you can actually think of associating? You will again look at the incidence vectors. Look at a1. v1 is so you have these vectors v1 to vm, which are the incidence vectors corresponding to a1 to am. Okay, you take these vectors and you want to show that lambda I vi equal to 0 implies for all I lambda equal to 0. This is what we want to show. Okay. So again, what is vi vj is nothing but the intersection of cardinality is a1 intersection aj, ai intersection aj. This is what the inner product is giving you. Okay, and I know that this is k. So look at this quantity here. I know this is equal to 0. So basically I want to somehow show that these lambdas are going to be 0. So I know that this vector summation lambda I vi is 0, therefore this inner product is 0. Okay. So what is this? So let's just expand this out. So you have these lambda I squared vi set coming in for the same things, and then for all I not equal to j, we have lambda I, lambda j, vi, vj, right? This is equal to this. And what is this value? This is nothing but the cardinality of the set I, ai, right? This is lambda I squared ai. And what is this value? This is k, right? So it's nothing, I mean, it's going to be nothing more than some manipulations on this sum to get a to show that these lambdas are 0. This can be rewritten in this way. Right? What is this? Summation lambda I lambda j. This is nothing but take the whole square and remove the lambda I squares. That's what is this sum. Right? It's clear, no? This, I mean, it's nothing, we are not doing anything great. So this is lambda I square cardinality ai minus k plus k times summation lambda I the whole square. So this is what the simplified form of whatever we have, and we know that this is equal to 0, right? Now I know that ai is greater than or equal to k, right? ai is greater than or equal to k, and there can be only one ai with actual value k, because I know that their intersection is k, and if there were two ai's with exact cardinality, then they must be the same sets, right? So there can be at most one set ai with cardinality k. Now, so this only for a particular I, this can be 0. This ai minus k can be 0, and at most one I it can be, it's true. And look at this sum. This sum can be 0 only if two lambda i's are 0, right? You need at least two lambda i's to go to 0. Two lambda i's to be non-zero for this to be 0. See, I'm claiming, what am I claiming? I'm claiming that you can write these vectors in this form where there is some non-zero lambda I. Now this tells me that if there is one non-zero lambda I, you need one more non-zero lambda I to make this 0. But then corresponding to that lambda I, the ai is going to survive here. So this whole thing can never be 0. See, how can this possibly go to 0? This has to go to 0. I know that all of these lambda i's are not 0. So there is some one lambda I which is non-zero. But if there is one lambda I which is non-zero, for this sum to go to 0, there must be another lambda I which is non-zero. But then if there are two lambda i's which are non-zero, there can be only one ai which is actually equal to k. For the other ai, it is greater than k. So that lambda you can never kill it off here. So this sum has to be greater than 0. So this is a contradiction that you have. So which means that all these lambda i's must be 0. Which basically means that these vi's are linearly independent. And therefore m has to be less than or equal to n. So is this idea proof? So it's the same trick that you're using. You basically get hold of these sets and get hold of these vectors and try to prove that they are linearly independent. So these are simpler examples. Sometimes you need a bit more work, and you might not actually be working with these incidence vectors. So the next example which we see, we'll work with polynomials. So you look at a certain set of polynomials and then try to show that they are actually going to be linearly independent. So you can, so these vectors is one way to associate vectors to these sets is to put the incidence vectors in. So now we will see how we can look at it in a different way and try to put some polynomials in instead of these vectors. So we look at a slightly different problem now. Okay, there is one exercise that you can do from this after this. So it is this. You are given n points in a plane. So we can try it out if you want. Given n points in a plane, let L be the number of lines defined by each pair of points. Okay, you are given n points and you look at each pair and look at the line that is defined by them. Show that L is at least n. So this is like a simple example that you, a simple exercise that you can try doing. You can think about it if you want. Okay. So these are now the third problem that we look will again. So the third problem that we look will be related, slightly different from this sort of this sets and subsets of 1 to n. We look at something related to this some geometry. So the problem is this. So you want to find n points in Rn such that the distance between any two of the points is one of two numbers. So you're given two numbers, say d1 and d2, some say n from n. Now you want to construct n points, no, not n points, you want to find points a1 to am such that the distance between these 2 points, between any two, is equal to either d1 or d2. So this is known as I'll call this set a1 to am as a two distance set. Okay. So what is the maximum number of points I can pick such that this condition is satisfied? So can you give a lower bound for this? In the sense, can you give me n choose 2 points such that this condition is always satisfied? Given Rn, can you give me n choose 2 points such that distance between any two is one of two numbers? But how many vertices do you have for it? I want n choose 2 points. I don't want n choose 2 pairs. I want n choose 2 points. So I'll slightly change this question and ask. I don't want two values. I want just one value. I want a set of m points such that any 2 points will have the same distance. 4 you have tetrahedron.
Just take one.
For the which case are you talking about? No, I'm saying 2 distance set or just 1 distance set? 1 distance. So what is the answer you're saying?
No, I'm saying minimum, as in you can take, just choose one coordinate, one bit as something and rest of the bit 0.
So yeah, you can do n plus 1. You can always find n plus 1 points. I mean, your tetrahedron is an example. But now I want this thing. So I can do much more. I am claiming that I can do at least n choose 2. So maybe you can. So the n choose 2 should give you some hint about where to look at. What sort of points should be there. That number n choose 2 should give you some clue. So here is an exercise. Show that there is an n choose 2 distance set in Rn. So now what we are going to prove is that you can't do much better than this. This is sort of the best that you can possibly hope to do. So what we want to prove is this. Suppose A1 to AM is a 2 distance set in Rn, then M can be at most n choose 2 plus 3n plus 2. So this is what we want to prove. Okay. So here these are not actually sets. So I mean you don't know how to associate vectors corresponding to these elements. So the idea is again going to be same. We want to associate some vectors from some vector space, some small dimensional vector space for these points, and then show that they are actually linearly independent, and hence the number m cannot be more than the dimension of the vector space. That is again going to be the idea that you are going to use. Okay. But now we look at some polynomials. In the sense we are going to associate for each of these points some polynomials. Okay. So okay, yeah. So look at this polynomial. For each I look at this polynomial, which is x minus ai squared minus d1 squared times okay. I look at m polynomials, and the polynomials are defined this way. This is nothing but inner product of x minus ai with itself. It's the distance. I mean, it's basically the distance. This quantity is nothing but xi minus I'll say ai1 squared summation plus x2 minus ai2 squared xn minus a in squared. It's the usual Euclidean norm. I mean usual distance that you have, right? That's what I mean by this thing here. So this is some polynomial, isn't it? This is some polynomial in x. It's an n-variate polynomial. X corresponds to the value x1 to xn. So this is an n-variate polynomial, right? N-variate polynomial degree 4, right? So you have m many of them, and you want to show that these are actually going to be linearly independent. Okay, linearly independent over R. I mean, the points are going to come from R, isn't it? So this is you're looking at R, and you want to show that these are linearly independent over. Okay. So how do you do it? So do you have any ideas about how to go about this? So look at this matrix here. Okay. There are m values here. There are m rows for this matrix corresponding to these polynomials f1, f2. So there are m values, m rows corresponding to each polynomial Fm, and there are the number of rows are it's from R to the n. Each point is one point in R to the n. So these are infinitely many columns, right? And the value here, so the value corresponding, so you have say the first m columns are these points A1 to Am, say. So you have A1 here, A2 here, Am, and then the remaining are all the other points in R. So you have a m cross m matrix sitting here, okay. So what do I want here? If I prove that that square matrix has full rank, then I'm done, isn't it? Right? Because this is basically the polynomial. So these F1 to Fm have to be linearly independent. Right? Is that clear? Because the first row of this matrix is nothing but F1 evaluated at all the points. And I'm saying that there is even a submatrix sitting here whose rank is which has rank m. So obviously this whole thing has to have the rank m. So what is the matrix sitting here? What is the values of this matrix here? What are the entries of this submatrix here? So A1 to Am is a two distance set with distance values D1 and D2. So what will be the matrix that is here? Why is this the case? Look at F1. When it is A1, then both these values are equal to 0, and then you have D1, D2 squared. For any other value, the distance between AI and AJ is 1 of D1 or D2, and therefore this polynomial has to be evaluated to 0 at that point. Right? So this matrix is actually like an identity matrix that is sitting here with these values here. So this is full rank. So these vectors are actually R. Right. So now I need to find a set of collection of linearly independent vectors which is going to span these such that I can, then I know that only so many can be there, right? I need to find a set of. So the idea to find them, we will just expand this out and see what we need. Okay, let's just expand these things out. What is this? This is summation xj minus aij squared minus d1 squared summation xj minus aij squared minus d2 squared. Okay, this is what is fi of x. So what are the terms that are going to come in it? So there will be this, when you multiply these, you have the terms which come like x j minus a ij squared times xk minus aik squared, right? When you multiply these two, then you have a term which is minus d2 squared times summation xj minus a ij squared. You have minus d1 squared summation xj minus aij squared plus, right? So this is going to be what this is, fi will look like this. So you need to find a suitable set of linear vectors which is going to give me all these things. So I claim that these values, say, so these are going to give me all these xj squared terms which are going to come in there. I can get hold of all those terms from this polynomial here, right? Look at this squared times xj. So what all are the monomials that I am going to have in this polynomial? One is both xj and xk squared is there, right? So xj and xk squared can give me a degree 4 polynomial possibly. So look at this polynomial is going to give me all those terms for, right? Then this can have an xj squared and just an xk sitting here. I can get hold of all of those from here, right? Then I could have just xi, xj coming. So I add all these polynomials, say, all these monomials xi and xj for 1 less than I, j less than n. Okay? I add all these. And then I add xi for 1 less than I less than n, and I add the constant. So these polynomials will definitely give me all these f. These things can be written as a linear combination of these polynomials here. So it's basically by checking. So you can try it out. It's not. So look at what all terms are coming out here. Just expand this out. So you have these terms xj squared, xk squared coming in. You have xj squared, xk coming in. You have just xj, xk coming in. Then you have a constant times xk coming in. So these polynomials are going to generate all these. A linear combination of those polynomials are going to give me these FIs. The dimension of, so the number of linearly independent polynomials I can have is at most so many of them. So those are a linearly independent collection. I can have only so many of them. Okay. So how many are there here? What is the number of polynomials that I have taken here? How many such polynomials? There's only one. How many such polynomials? N of them. And how many such? I'll also have I and j equal. So it is n choose 2 plus n. And how many of these? There are n of them. Which basically shows that you can have only so many of them. I've given you a linearly independent collection, and I know that all these are linearly independent, and therefore you can have only so many of them. Right? So even though this looks slightly different from these two proofs, the basic idea is again the same. You want to somehow associate some sort of vectors and show that they are linearly independent. So has anyone got anything about this problem here, this exercise? Some idea?
Consider the n vector, represent your coordinate as an n vector.
Okay.
So choose n and set them to be a distance d. NC2,
Okay.
you'll have NC2 such vectors.
Okay.
So maximum, if you consider any two of these NC2 vectors.
No, how are you selecting the vectors?
Like, consider the coordinate is basically an n coordinate, right?
Yeah, there are n. It's an n tuple.
Yeah. So take any two and set them to be 1.
Take
Remaining
any.
as 0.
Okay.
So NC2 such things are possible.
Yeah.
Now among these, I'm saying these are the NC2 points because among these, if you consider any 2 points, either they can have one of these ones common or both not common. So I'll give 2 distances corresponding.
That's the basic. So did you get that argument? Okay, then think. I mean, you can think about it more. Okay. So we'll look at we'll look at one more example, which is going to use the same technique, which is slightly, it's not slightly different, it's the same thing. I'll just rub this part here. So the origin of this problem that I'm going to discuss is from some communication networks which happened some long time back in the 1970s or something. So the problem was this. You have a graph. You have a graph G, some vertices and edges. Now you want to move data from one vertex to the other. So at each stage, at each vertex, the vertex should know to which vertex I should send the data. I need to do it very fast. I mean, I need to send it through the shortest path. Okay. So at each vertex, I don't have to. The graph is huge. So each vertex cannot store the shortest path to every vertex. So somehow it must be able to know to which vertex I should send so that this will reach in the least time. Okay, that is a problem. You have a large graph, some network. So there is some communication that is happening. And at each vertex, you should know which is the short. So you have given the graph and you have given 2 points, S and T, not S and T. So there is this vertex S, which is said transmit this data to a vertex T. It doesn't know the whole graph. It can only know its neighbors. Now this vertex wants to pass it to T in the shortest time, right? So let's think that this is like a static network. You don't have things come adding or going. It's a static network. So the question is how to assign some. So suppose I manage to assign some addresses to these vertices in such a way that just by looking at the neighbors, I know which vertex to go to. That's what I need. So the problem is this: assign some sort of an addressing scheme to these vertices, so that the distance is somehow preserved. So that if I look at the neighbor, I know which path to take to reach to the vertex T. So S has the address of T, sit with it, and it wants to know the shortest path with which it can reach. But it can only know the address of its neighbors. It can't know the address of the values before it. And it doesn't know the shortest path to this thing. So somehow I want to compute the shortest path as I go along the path. Okay? This is the problem that is there. And I want to somehow reduce the size of this address. I don't want a huge address space. So the idea that was used by, this problem was posed in the 1970s, and this idea is due to two people called Graham and Pollack. So they gave an addressing scheme for these vertices so that you can do this problem. So the addressing scheme that they did was this. Look at, the addresses are going to be bit strings, which can have either 0, 1 or a don't care. Don't care is like you can put whatever value you want for it. Okay. Now so the idea is to assign these addresses in such a way that I'll define some sort of a modified Hamming distance on these things. So when it is a start, you don't know what the Hamming distance is, but somehow if I define a Hamming distance in such a way that I know this Hamming distance gives me the length of the shortest path, say. Okay, the Hamming distance between any two vertices is going to give me the shortest path. Then is it clear that I can do this sort of shortest path walk? So sitting at S, I know the address of my neighbors. So I'll get each of those, and from that vertex I'll compute what is the distance to T, because I know T's address. I know that the addressing is in such a way that the Hamming distance is going to give me the shortest length path. So I'll compute it for each of these neighbors, and which one is the shortest, I'll go to that vertex, and from there I'll again continue doing the same thing. Right? So if I have such a scheme which is going to encode the length of the paths, then I'm. So here is a simple addressing scheme that you have. So for each vertex, let's say there are n vertices, v1 to vn. I'm going to give a bit string. So the size of the bit string is like this. So let me define what it means to be the distance between such two vectors. So you have to say two vectors x and y in 0, 1. Okay, 2 bits. I'll say that the distance between x and y is 1 if x and y are, say, if x is equal to 1, y equal to 0, or x equal to 0, y equal to 1. All other case distance is 0. So if you have 2 bits, one is 0 and the other is star, you can assume that the star is also 0 and the distance is 0. So star is like a don't care, you can put whatever you want. I mean, you'll put the value so that the distance goes to 0. Right? So it's not clear why you want to do such a thing to this. So their scheme that they have, the encoding is what, so there you will see why it is coming this way. So you have these n vectors and the address length is going to be, so look at the shortest path from V1 to V2, okay. So I can do some sort of a pre-computing on the graph. These vertices themselves cannot hold too many data, but I can do some sort of a pre-computing and give these vertices assign addresses. So this is the pre-computing stage where I'll compute the addresses. After that I'll set these addresses to these vertices and then the vertices don't have more data with them, right. So that is the idea. So I want to somehow pre-compute these addresses given this network. So look at the shortest path from V1 to a particular vertex, say V2, okay. And then what you do is you put all zeros corresponding to, so the number of bits here is the shortest distance between V1 and V2, okay. I put all zeros here and for V2 I put all ones, okay. Similarly, I look at distance of V1 and V3 here, I put all zeros here and for V3 I'll put all ones here. These values I'll put as star, these values are star, okay. So this is going to be my vector. So I do this for each of these vectors. I do it till d v1 vn. Again I put all zeros here and corresponding to vn I put all ones, okay. So now look at these two values here. The distance is exactly the shortest path between V1 and V2, right? Isn't it?
What do you mean putting all ones?
I put all these bit positions as 1.
Is that the address of V2?
Address of V2 is the whole thing. The whole thing. This one, that is the shortest distance between V1 and V2. That I can pre-compute. So the graphs, the communication network is given to me. No new vertices are going to come in. So I can do some sort of a pre-computation on the whole thing and assign it at that the vertices themselves don't have too many memory. It can't remember which is the shortest path where to go. It just has its address and the address of its neighbors. And then it wants to find the shortest path. So there is some addressing of this form which will give you the, which will satisfy these conditions that I want. But this is slightly large. This is something like, what is the, this will be something like the diameter of the graph times n minus 1. Sort of. It's a large size addresses. The idea is to shorten this address size. And the conjecture of these people was that you can do with n minus 1 bit strings are enough to do this. You can, so you know that there is some addressing scheme which will preserve the, such that this Hamming distance will preserve the shortest distance. You know there is an addressing scheme, which this is the addressing scheme. But it requires such a large size addresses. Now, can you reduce the size of it? So they conjectured that you can do with n minus 1. And the proof that we will see is that they said that you can't do better. N minus 1 is the best you can do. You can't do more than that. And the beautiful thing about this thing is that this problem of proving that this the address size should be at least n minus 1, reduces to following this theorem. Given a complete graph on n vertices, let B1 to Bm be edge disjoint bipartite graphs, edge disjoint complete bipartite graphs. Edge disjoint complete bipartite graphs such that the union of edges is is Kn, is the entire graph, right? You want to partition the complete graph into m edge disjoint complete bipartite graphs. Then m can be at most n minus 1. And proving this is actually equivalent to proving this theorem. So I won't give the equivalence. Equivalence is, should I say it? Or I actually have time. Okay. So if you see here, what they are doing is, this is like, so look at a address that I give to a vertex. It is from 0, 1 or star, right? So look at the Boolean hypercube now, okay? It is some 0, 1 to the n. Each of these vectors will correspond to some subset of vertices in the Boolean hypercube, right? In this way, look at V2. Look at a particular, say, look at a bit x, which is say 1, 1, 1, 0, and then star, 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 okay? So look at, this is like n bit strings. So this will correspond to 8 vertices in the hypercube, corresponding to each of these settings, right? So what I'm basically trying to say is that this graph can be converted. So now what I do is, once I have these vertices, I squash them together to one vertex, and any edge that goes out of these vertices, I'll connect it to the edge that I have. So there are 8 vertices here. I'll bring all those, I'll squash all those vertices together to one vertex, and there are some edges going out of it. Whatever edges went out of the original vertices will go out of this new vertex now. Okay, I squash the cube for each of these things. So I have now it's a squashed cube. I mean, some of the vertices I have brought together. Now what I am saying is that this G can be converted to such a squashed cube, and the question is, what should be the size of the squashed cube, right? It's not clear, I guess. So I'm trying to look at it in a different way, this assignment. So each of these vertices I am addressing in some bit string, but there are some of these don't cares. Okay, so I'm going to map a bit string to a set of vertices because there are these don't cares. I'll assign it to a set of vertices. And the set of vertices basically corresponds to the different Boolean assignments to these don't cares. Okay, so I have a set of vertices corresponding to each vertex here. I have a set of vertices there. Now what I can do is collect all those vertices together and bring them to one vertex and look at the edges that go out of it. So I have the whole Boolean hypercube, and I do the squashing operation on each of these vertices. I bring them together. For each vertex, I'll take the corresponding things and bring them together. Then you can actually show that it's equivalent to saying that this G can be converted to such a squash cube. That's what we are saying, right? When you are giving an assignment, we are basically trying to convert this to a squash cube here, which is of the smallest size. That is what you are trying to prove. And how can I prove a lower bound? I mean, how can I show that you need at least so many of them? If I can show a graph for which the squash cube size is at least has to be, oh wait, this is not correct. So if I can find a graph where the squash cube size is at least so much, then that is what I want. I want to say that you can't do much better than this. So there is some graph for which you need so much. So you can't hope to do better, right? So the claim is that the complete graph on n vertices is the example for which you can't do much better. Okay. Yeah, but that is not a complete this thing.
We prove that, okay, take any two addresses, so they should not map to the same vertex in the squash cube. So for each vertex, each address should correspond to a different vertex in the squash cube. So there should be at least n vertices in the squash cube for this address to be distinct.
Okay. Okay, I just have to go over it. I think there is some problem there. I'm not very sure.
Okay, can two vertices have distinct addresses like this? Say 10 zeros, 10 stars, then 5 zeros, and rest.
No, see, I am talking about any addressing scheme here. This is not this addressing scheme. Any addressing scheme. It could be totally random. I don't know what the addressing scheme is. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe you can do something like that. I don't know. See, I have to argue against any addressing scheme. It's not this addressing scheme I'm arguing against.
Okay.
Whatever addressing scheme you give with this thing, I need so much. I can't do better. Maybe there are some clever ways of addressing schemes so that you can reduce this. But what I'm saying is that you can't do it. So I have to argue against any such addressing scheme here by coming up with one graph for which you actually need so much. Right. So that is a thing that you have to show.
So by claiming that two vertices should map to different vertices in the cube need not be true.
Yeah. Maybe you can prove that it has to be true, but I don't know how to prove it. Maybe you can prove that any good, because I want this condition also, no? I want that the Hamming distance have to preserve some sort of a shortest distance. I don't know, maybe you can use that to actually show that they have to map to different vertices, but I don't know how to prove it. I mean, it possibly is true, but I don't know how to prove it. So you can look at it as a graph, no? I mean, look at the vertices, edges that go out of the other vertices and connect it to the new vertex. That's what I mean by squash. Make all those vertices as one vertex, and for each edge that goes out from the original vertex, connect it to this vertex, new vertex that you have.
Yeah, so at least two vertices, the original graph can map to this new point.
No, I think what he's saying that if you look at the collection of points here and collection of points here, then they don't intersect. That's what he's saying, I guess. That's what you're claiming, no? Yeah. Not that one. This is the one.
But actually they can be subset, no? So V1 can be 5 zeros, 10 zeros and star. V2 can be 5 zeros and rest all stars. So
Yeah, but the bit values are actually going to be different, isn't it? See, the stars, it can't be that all these bit values are the same and the stars are also the same.
Yeah.
That's when you have the same thing coming in.
Yeah.
So that I don't know whether, maybe you can do something like that and get away, but I don't know whether it is so. It might not be possible like to do like that. That is the only case when you actually have some sort of an intersection of the subsets. Okay. So we want to prove something like this. So now just forget this and think about this. Can you actually give me such a collection that is given Kn? Can you give me n-1 bipartite graphs, edge disjoint bipartite graphs which will cover the whole graph? So the trivial way is each edge you can consider as a bipartite graph. There are n choose too many of them. But can you do it with just n-1? So you know what a complete bipartite graph is. Can you show that you can actually do n-1 is enough? I mean, yeah, for this thing n-1 is enough. You get with n-1 complete bipartite graphs, you can cover the whole graph. No, it need not have the whole vertex set. It need not have. It can have. It doesn't matter. I mean,
Take n minus star, take one vertex.
yeah. So that's the thing. Take one vertex here and the remaining n minus 1 here. Look at all the edges going out. Do it for each of these vertices. There are n minus 1 of them because the last vertex would have definitely been covered. So you have covered all the edges and with n minus 1 complete bipartite graphs. I mean, bipartite graph is just the star. There is one vertex on this side and n vertices there. N minus 1 vertices on the other side. So you can do it with n minus 1. So I want to show that you can't do better. This is the best you can do. Okay. So here the proof is going to be slightly different from what we are doing here, but not much. So look at a particular bipartite graph BK. Okay, this is one of the complete bipartite graphs in the partition of the graph. So it has this bipartition xk and yk, right? The left side and the right side, there is a bipartition. These vertices are disjoint, xk and yk are disjoint. Corresponding to this bk, look at a matrix. I define a matrix AK. Okay. So this is an n cross n matrix. Okay. And AK of ij, the ijth entry of this matrix is 1 if I is in xk and j is in yk. Okay. So I have a matrix like this. So the diagonal entries are all zeros, and this is not symmetric. Do you know what a symmetric matrix is? So this can't be symmetric the way I have defined it. I mean, I have a partition, then it's not symmetric also. It's a matrix 0 1 matrix. Okay. Now look at the sum of all these matrices. M. Okay. What can I say about this matrix here? Any ij, any edge in the graph. So except these values here, all the ij's are any I and j, any ij of S corresponds to one edge in the complete graph, right? And this bipartition covers all the edges. So for every ij, either S of ij is 1 or S of ji is 1, right? Exactly one of these has to be true. Both of them, exactly one has to be true because all edges are being covered by this bipartition, and both cannot be true because of the way in which I have defined it, right? Is this clear how this matrix, what this matrix is?
What if xk union yk is not equal to the complete vertex?
Doesn't matter, no? Because I am taking over all the bipartitions. All the bipartitions should cover all the edges. That's my assumption. My assumption is that this covers the entire graph. S is the summation of these matrices. Xk, Yk are the bipartitions of this bipartite graph.
So even if this AK, construction of AK, so you say, okay, what if I does not belong to xk and does not belong to yk also?
0. Only once can it actually come because that edge is covered exactly once, right? Because it's a disjoint bipartite graphs. Each ij occurs exactly once. So this has to be true, right? So look at this graph, this matrix, S plus S transpose. What will this be? How will it look like? Exactly. So this is basically, you can write this as J. J is the all ones matrix everywhere. So this is how you write it. When it's nothing, this matrix. 0. This is the matrix. S plus S transpose is going to look like this. Okay. So what do I want to show? So what is the rank of this matrix AK? Yeah, that I forgot to ask. What is the rank of the matrix A? AK. So is everyone clear what rank is? It's basically the number of linearly independent rows or linearly independent columns. So the way I have defined AK, what is the rank? I claim that this is actually equal to 1. Why is that? What I am basically saying is that there is just one, the same row occurs, each row is the same, there is no difference. Is that clear? Why should that be? See, look at the first, say, look at the part which is x, look at a particular x in xk, look at the column corresponding, row corresponding to it. For all the values corresponding to all the vertices in yk, there is a 1, and everywhere else there is a 0. And this happens for each vertex in xk, isn't it? So it's the same row that is going to come for all vertices here, and the rest are all zeros, right? Because it's a complete bipartite graph. So every vertex in xk is connected to every vertex in yk. So all those values are going to be 1 and the remaining are 0. And this is true for any x in xk, and it has to be 0 everywhere else. So this is a rank 1 matrix, right? All the rows corresponding to this this bipartition is 0 followed by 1s, and all the remaining rows are 0. So this is a rank 1 matrix. So the rank of S then is at most m, right? Because it's a sum of rank 1 matrices. You can say that the rank of S is at most m. Now if I show that the rank of S is actually large, then I get my bound here, right? And that's what I'm going to show, that the rank of this matrix is large. I want to show that the rank of S, so to show that rank of S is at least n minus 1. This is what I want to show now. Then I am done. Is it clear? So we'll suppose not. Okay. That means rank of S is at most n minus 2. Okay. Look at this set of equations. So S defines some matrix. So this is S times x1 to xn equal to 0 and summation xi equal to 0. So this is a set of equations. There are n plus 1 equations, right? But how many linearly independent equations are there? If I assume that the rank of S is at most n minus 2, then how many linearly independent equations are there here? At most n minus 1, right? So there are n variables and at most n minus 1 equations. So homogeneous equations where you have n variables and at most n minus 1 linearly independent equations, there is a non-trivial solution for this, right? That is, there is a solution to this which is not all 0. Pick such a solution. Let us pick an x in Rn, which is a solution for this system. I think I broke this. So now, what this means that this is equal to 0, right? J times x. J is the odd one vector. That's what I mean, basically because of this. And what is J? So this is true. Look at this inner product. Okay. This is same as x and minus x, right? Or say minus x and x, right? This inner product is equal to this because of whatever assumptions you have made. This is nothing but x transpose Sx, right? This is S transpose x transpose times x, and that is nothing but this. This is equal to 0 because Sx is 0. But this is a contradiction. You can't have a non-zero vector whose inner product is going to 0, right? So the rank cannot be less than n by 2, it has to be at least so much. Is the argument clear? Is it okay? So this basically means that m has to be at least n minus 1. So yeah. Okay, so I think so this is what I was planning to do anyway. So you can read more about these things. There are some books which you can refer if you want. It's called, one is Extremal Combinatorics by Stasis Yukna. The other is called Linear Algebraic Methods in Combinatorics by Babai and Frankel. So these examples are the first few examples in these books. You can get more examples and you can read more about it if you want. These references are there. Okay, so I guess that's it.